Om Tat Sat. Welcome to Jyotirmayananda Society, our journey to self-realization. Please subscribe our channel for the mystical meanings and to enjoy daily satsang with us. We are currently exploring the scripture Yoga of Perfection, authored by Swami Jyotirmayananda Maharaj, narrated by myself, Swami Nikhilananda. Yesterday we had studied the first shloka number 54 from chapter 2. We are studying the characteristics of an enlightened sage, and the shloka was Sthit pragyasya ka bhasha samadhistasya keshava sthitadihi kim prabhasheta kim asit vrajet kim. So Arjun's question was, O Krishna, what are the characteristics of a sage who has acquired steady wisdom, meaning who is established in samadhi? How does he sit, speak, and walk? And Lord Krishna is explaining further, a clear understanding of the nature of a jnani. Such a person, a man of wisdom, is called jnani. That's why the study is called Jnana Yoga, knowledge of wisdom. It is very important for an aspirant. If the picture of the ideal is clear in the mind, he can develop an insight into the spiritual movement. Sthita Prajna state is the state of steady wisdom, is the ideal to be realized. It is the goal of spiritual movement. This is the siddhi, perfection, that must be attained by spiritual effort or sadhana. There must be an intimate relation between the end that is in view and the means that is adopted to acquire it. Therefore, the descriptions of the characteristics of a person of enlightenment are presented in the very beginning of the teachings of Lord Krishna. So, an aspirant may well know the goal and the steps needed to achieve that. So mind passes through five states. Dull, it's called the Muda Sthiti, Muda, distracted or Kshipta, partially concentrated, Vikshipta, one pointed is Ekagrita, and controlled is Niruddha. So this is the Sanskrit words I'm giving you with the English words so you can understand deeper the shloka itself and the profound meanings. On the path of yoga, an aspirant overcomes the first three states of the mind. He promotes increasing one pointedness in his mind. Then he is able to practice intense meditation on the reality of the self. So, when the mind is free from the smoke of dullness, or mood sthiti, and the wind of distractions or kshipta sthiti, it becomes serene and calm. The light of reason burns steadily in such a mind. The personality of an aspirant is effectively integrated in the light of pure reason. When the intellect is conditioned by the negative states of the mind, it is unable to bestow the wisdom of the soul. It is unable to bring about total transformation in an individual. Such an intellect is unable to tear the veil of ignorance, also known as avidya. The intellect in most people is able to bring an indirect knowledge of the spiritual mysteries of life. Indirect. But until this intellect is freed from the limitations of the mind and is allowed to be transformed into intuitive vision, it is unable to bestow self realization. It is only theoretical at this point. Purified by the waters of profound meditation, the intellect turns into prajna or intuitive vision. Then the mind is controlled. A yogi attains the niruddha or controlled state of mind. Though operating through his mind, he is ever beyond the projections of the mind. Just as a screen in a theatrical show is untouched by the various projections of the film, in the same way, the realized yogi sees his self untouched by the projections of the mind. The characteristics that manifest in a sage of enlightenment must be understood with a subtle intellect. The questions of Arjuna are highly figurative. How does a sage sit? This question refers to the mental basis of security and stability in a sage. Though seated on chairs and cushioned seats, people are actually resting on their cherished desires. Some have their mind set on wealth, some on a dear relative, some on a prospect of business. But in the case of a sage, he is seated in the self. How does he speak? This question implies the mental and physical expression of an illumined personality. All expressions in life are based upon the mental conditions of a person. Therefore, it is by understanding the mental state of a yogi one can understand how he is able to perform diverse actions and activities in his day to day life. Similarly, the question, how does he walk, refers to the conduct of a yogi in the world of relativity. Lord Krishna replies to these questions of Arjuna in the following verses, which is verse number 55. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. God is called Bhagavan. Nowhere in the Bhagavad Gita it says Shri Krishna Uvacha. So, not as an individual but as the cosmic creator, God is answering. Uvacha means speaking. So, now God is answering that question that Arjuna has asked. प्रजहाति यदा कामान् सर्वान् पार्थ मनोगतान् आत्मन्येवात्मना तुष्टः स्थितप्रज्ञस्तदोच्यते. O Arjuna, when a man thoroughly renounces all the desires of the mind and is satisfied by the self, in the self, then he is called a man of steady wisdom. Explanation: a wise sage cannot be known by external marks. Therefore, it is important to understand his internal condition. He has renounced all desires of the mind. Avidya or ignorance is the disease of the causal body or of the deep unconscious. It obscures the nature of the self, and overcome by ignorance, the subconscious mind of a person continues to harbor various subtle desires. These subtle desires are called vasanas. Without a deeper movement in the mind, it is difficult to understand them. These vasanas or subtle desires become the basis for desiring and cravings that manifest in the unconscious mind of a person. In the case of an ignorant person, the mind is filled with egoistic desires. Even when a person seems to be content and satisfied, yet his unillumined mind continues to hold subtle desires in its subconscious and unconscious depths. When the subtle desires of the mind are renounced, the mental atmosphere becomes like the sky without clouds. With the removal of subtle desires, the intellect shines brighter and the life of a yogi becomes filled with wisdom and divine love. The presence of desires is the expression of a weak mind. A strong mind does not need to desire. It wills on the basis of divine insight. It does not crave. It does not humiliate itself. All satisfactions arise in the self. It is the self that is the source of all forms of joy. However, overcome by ignorance, most people seek happiness in objects. They do not experience bliss in the self by the self. They experience pleasure in the self through illusory objects. It is important to understand that pleasure is an illusory development, while bliss is the revelation of the self, also known as Bhuma. Bhuma is unbounded bliss. All forms of joy that are conditioned by objects, time, and space are sources of pain. They are, in fact, pain appearing as pleasure. According to Patanjali Maharshi, he says, Sarvam Dukkham Vivekinaha, meaning all pleasures of the world are painful for the wise. The thoughts and desires that appear in the mind of a sage towards the good of humanity are founded on wisdom. They are not governed by egoistic vision of life. Therefore, they are called true thoughts or sat sankalpa, and true desires sat kama. These pure meditations sustain the day to day activities of a sage. So, with this, we conclude our today's satsang, and I will see you tomorrow. Hari Om Tat Sat.